Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm so excited that you could join me today. Thank you so much for always liking, subscribing, commenting, and just being involved in just this hard conversation, us talking about race. I think these things are very important. I think education on this issue is extremely important. It helps us understand not only obviously having empathy for the people that are hurting, but understand our history as America as well and where we came from. And I believe that in order to understand where we're going and how to make it better, we have to learn and understand where we've come from. Today, let me just start off saying my last video about some systemic racism issues kind of brought up some questions where people don't know what systemic racism is. And I think that it's important for us to learn what systemic racism is, but I think it also helps by me explaining this, especially on my channel, it kind of helps us kind of understand all the other videos that I've made when it comes to racism and why it's so important to learn it and why racism isn't just a racial slur, why this issue is not just because Black people don't want to be called the N-word anymore. We don't. But that's not the entire issue. So I just felt I'd take the time today to really just touch on and explain what systemic racism is. It's a big topic right now, especially while we're going through this presidential election. It's a huge topic right now. A lot of people say it's not real or systemic racism isn't real, it's a myth. Which is odd because we actually have laws in place that were put in place to stop systemic racism. So it's weird to say it doesn't exist when there's laws in place that stopped it from existing. But anyway, so I want to explain what systemic racism is. It's structures and systems that have procedures and processes that disadvantages African Americans or Black people. That is what systemic racism is. It is a system that is put in place solely for the downfall of a certain group of people or a minority. It is a system. Now, there's a couple things that I want to touch on, kind of referring to my last video if you didn't see it. I touched a little bit on the vice presidential debate in this context when it comes to systemic racism. Because in the debate, Mike Pence said that systemic racism wasn't real, and then he went on to mention Kamala Harris's history as a prosecutor. Which, two things I found interesting about that conversation that happened just in that little split minute or so of time is that he denies systemic racism in one sentence and goes on to give an example of it in the next sentence and how Kamala Harris has played a part in systemic racism. The other thing I find interesting is because systemic racism is a system in place, it is embedded into our system. People of color, Black people, can also play a role in furthering systemic racism, systemic oppression. And so while, yes, Kamala Harris is a Black Indian woman, she did play a role in furthering systemic oppression. She was not exempt from not playing a role in it, okay? Also, you have things like redlining. I'll put links always in the description box so you can look it up, but just to give you an overview, pretty much redlining was they took maps. So when the soldiers came home from war, they took maps and they outlined neighborhoods that were less desirable in red. And so what happened was when they went to sell a home or people wanted to buy a home, they would sell to those people in this particular community. They would show them homes and houses in the least desirable neighborhood. So they would show Black people houses in these neighborhoods and then show white people the neighborhoods that were more desirable. And what happens, that's where you get your neighborhoods today. Predominantly black neighborhoods, predominantly white neighborhoods. That's how all this stuff is still affecting us today because of things like redlining, which was a direct result of systemic racism. Was only black people can buy in these areas. What will happen was we'll put them here, they're least desirable. Then, meaning that this area is least desirable means that when they go to sell these places, they're not going to make anything off of it. Because what happened is that when the white people in the predominantly white areas would go to sell their homes, they were able to build generational wealth off of the homes that they sold, which were the same homes in these predominantly black areas. The only difference is that you could have the same exact home, one in one area, one in another area, and they knew when they were selling these homes, they're not going to be able to make as much money. And so it was a system in place to directly affect, hey, I'm going to keep you down so that you cannot succeed. You can't go anywhere. You can't build generational wealth. You can't send your kids to college. You can't do any of those things. Because residential, buying a home, that's one of the fastest ways to build wealth is buying property, having a home, selling that property, selling that home, putting it on the market. I know people who buy homes, fix them up, and sell them for, $50, $60, $70, $100,000 more than what they paid for, and they're making money. They're flipping houses. And so it's the same thing. If I go into a house and say the cabinets are bad, and I put in brand new 42-inch cabinets, say the floors are disgusting, and I go in and I put hardwood floors, that value of that home is going up. That is pretty much what was happening, is that it wasn't just you can't live outside this area, but it's I'm going to put you in this area knowing that you can't build any generational wealth off of it. Another, I don't know if I made a video yet on redlining, but I'll go into detail about that at a later date. Another example of systemic racism is in one of my last videos where I talked about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where our U.S. government was purposefully putting syphilis into one minority group, black men. They were putting them into black men. So you had black men getting syphilis, giving it to their spouses, their significant others, and then them transferring it to their kids. So it was a systemic issue. I'm going to put you in a position where you contract this disease, and now your significant other will also get this disease because syphilis is transferred through sexual contact. And now your children now have the ability to also get this disease. So I'm putting a system in place. That's what I say. I tell people all the time, my personal opinion is that a lot of times people will say that they've been called racial slurs before, and sure, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that you have had prejudice against you no matter what color you are. Absolutely. I believe you have, That's why I think that this channel isn't just talking about racism just within one community. I think we can all stop prejudice from happening. If we see someone that's talking, you can't choose your skin color, you can't choose what skin you're in. And so to be discriminated against because of that in any aspect is bad. And it's honestly just, it's really sad. But like I said, it goes beyond just being called the N-word or racial slur. It's having government entities that are strategically and have been strategically working for your demise and your downfall strictly because of your skin color. Only because of the color of the skin that you're in. Our government, there are entities, there are laws in place that we've had to put in place. Civil rights law, things like that. to prevent systemic racism from happening. Does systemic racism still happen today? Yeah, it does. I know we don't want to believe it does, but it does. It's still embedded into our system. We have things like the 13th Amendment, where slavery is abolished, except for if you're in prison. Things like the 13th Amendment, where slavery is abolished, except for if you're in prison. If you're in prison, you're a slave. So what happens? We have things like the war on drugs, where you have crack cocaine and you have regular cocaine. The only difference is that one comes in powdered form and one comes in rock form. But what was happening was they were putting a harsher sentence on the rock form because the rock form was more likely to be found in black communities. And what happened is that, if y'all don't know this, the government went and planted crack cocaine in those black cities, and then they were arresting black people, and then they were putting them in jail. And that is systemic racism. Black and white people use marijuana at the same rate. However, black people get harsher sentences for it. I think this is a lot. It has a lot to do with how black people are portrayed in media. How we're, I was talking to someone the other day where I was telling them, like, as a dark-skinned black woman, if I've ever seen, very rarely have I seen darker-skinned black women portrayed in movies and TV as not ghetto, not ratchet, not any of those things. I've always seen them portrayed as the ghetto, loud black friend, or, always the least desirable one. I've never, very rarely seen a darker skinned black woman portrayed in a good light in media, in TV and things like that. And so that is systemic racism. It is embedded into our system. And so to say that it's not real is weird, because we have things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. We have things like the war on drugs. We have things like redlining. We have things like Civil Rights Act that have been put into place to stop systemic racism from happening. And so I know this is a little bit shorter than usual videos, but I really just wanted to explain and kind of surface what systemic racism is, and how it's a system that is in place for the downfall of a specific group of people. It is literally targeted. Like I said, we see that. We see that all through our recent history. We see systemic racism that was embedded so far deep into our nation's history that we have to go in and just yank things out. But I believe that we're moving, hopefully, we are moving to a place in our society where people are actually waking up, where we won't continue to deny it, but we'll continue to not only see it, but accept it and understand that this is just our history. It's ugly. It's bad, sure. But if we're going to show empathy and we call, people, black people, our brothers and sisters, then we have to make this place better. We have to make it better. And I believe we will. I believe that we will make America better. We'll make America better than it ever has been before. I love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for subscribing. You're amazing. I love you guys. I hope you have a great, amazing, blessed rest of your week. See you soon, guys. Bye.